Yesterday's parsha, we'd mentioned the pasuk Atem advik v'Hashem Elokechem Chaim Kulchem Hayom. So there's a Gemara which we mentioned in the past. It's Gemara in Tainus. Rava says, "Harbe lomarati mi Rabosai." I've learned enormous from my teachers. Michavera Yosef Rabosai, and from my colleagues even more than from my Rabbeim. Umitamidi Yosef Kulam. And for my students, I learned more than from all of them. So the conventional way of understanding that means that why does a teacher learn more from his students than from his colleagues and his teachers? Because when you prepare to teach that information, you have to prepare differently. Well, because the students ask questions, and through the questions, the teacher has new insights in the information which he's disseminating, which he's trying to communicate to the students. So I explained why that cannot be pshat in Rava's words, because Rav is speaking about something which is specific to Torah, because that if that is the understanding, that's true regarding any subject to teach. It does not be Torah. Mahavdil, you teach medicine, mathematics, whatever it may be. That same level of preparation or the questions, queries of the students leads the teacher to new levels of understanding. So the way we explained it in the past was this. It's clear from the Gemara that the basis to come upon the truth of Torah is based upon siyata d'shmaya. That's what it's based upon. A person who agrees to be a student of Torah. That means I'm willing to listen. Whether the parent puts him in the class or the person chooses to be a recipient, to take out time to study Torah. The level of commitment in terms of the level of sacrifice for Torah is great because time has value. However, it's not the same sacrifice as when people enter into a dialogue. Here's why. Because when people enter into the discussion, it's always a question, who's more right? Am I right or you right? And as the Gemara says, that when people enter into any discussion based on the pasuk at the end of Bamidbar, initially it's nasis sonum zelvazeh. It's like two enemies are at each other's throats, and ultimately they come to a conclusion. And then they agree on whatever the understanding is. But initially, it's literally, it's toe to toe. So there's a greater level of pushback, because if I accept your understanding, I have to agree that mine may not be correct. So for colleagues when they enter into a dialogue, the level of sacrifice to a degree in this context is to a greater degree. What about a teacher who disseminates Torah to students? That means he's assuming a responsibility for Klal Yisrael, so they should understand the word of Hashem. That means you're taking on there's the word achrayus, responsibility, to make sure that Jews understand the word of Hashem. When you take on an achrayus for the tzibur, one merits a greater level of siyata d'shmaya. And because you merit a greater level of siyata d'shmaya, you come upon a greater degree of truth. And that's the reason why it's mi talmida Yosef Kulam. For my students, more than my colleagues, more than my teachers. That's the way I explained it. But in this last week's parsha, on the pasuk Atem advikim Hashem Elokechem Chaim Kulchem Hayom, the Baal HaTurim says, after Moshe Rabbeinu says this to Klal Yisrael, he speaks about Ani Lomarati. I've taught you ABC. So he explains the juxtaposition of Ani Lomarati, I've taught you, to Kulchem, because Moshe Rabbeinu assumed ability to teach Kulchem, all of you, therefore he was able to teach them at that special level. That because he took on the responsibility to teach Klal Yisrael Torah, therefore he was able to be limadati, to be able to communicate it with a level of absoluteness as he did. So this is the concept. But the Baal HaTurim says it's alluded through the juxtaposition of Kulchem and limadati, and I've taught them. There's a word from Beinu Bachia at the end of Zosa Brocha, the pasuk of Torah Tziv Elonu Moshe Morosho Kilas Yaakov. This is the Torah. Torah Tziv Elonu Moshe. Moshe taught us the Torah. It is the heritage of Kilas Yaakov. So the Rebbeinu Bachia says, why doesn't it say Yerushas Yaakov? Yerushas Kilas Yaakov. What's Morosho? So he explains Morosho grammatically means that it's something that it's not only to study it, but to guarantee that it could be, that will be perpetuated to the next generation. And by teaching it at a level to give it that sense of value to the ones you teach it to, you do whatever you have to do to make sure it's going to exist beyond your own existence, to perpetuate into future generations. That's Morosha Kilas Yaakov. So that's taking on the achrayus. Within the words of Morosha lies assuming this level of responsibility to guarantee the perpetuation of Torah, that it remains eternal. It's one of the things he said, came upon this Balaturim. The other thing he says, interesting, Moshe Rabbeinu says, what did I teach you? Elo edus hachukim mishpatim. This is the edus, the testament, the statutes, and the mishpatim, and the laws. So he says the Balaturim, gematria, the numerical value of the edus, is the same numerical value as yiras. Yiras Hashem. Edus is yiras. What does that mean? Edus is yiras. So if you remember, we mentioned about Laturim beginning Parshas Dvorim, that if you take the last letter of every one of the Chamoshim and you add up the numerical value of all those letters, the numerical value is yiras. Is yiras. And he says, what is the Torah telling us? That Reishis Chochma Yiras Hashem. As David says, what is the prerequisite to Chochma? Yiras Hashem. So what is Edus? Edus is testimony. Testimony is the only credible evidence in court. If you have valid testimony, you put a person to death. You're able to give a person lashes, you're able to extract money from a person. So credible evidence is edus. Edus is what? Is clarity, it's truth. How does one come upon the truth of Torah? Edus. Edus through Yerushalayim. If one has Yerushalayim, you come upon the truth of Torah. That's edus. We find by the Mishkan, who are the people who were the artisans of the Mishkan? So the Torah tells us, "B'leiv kol chacham leiv nasati chochma." In the heart of every person who had wisdom in his heart, I gave the wisdom, the ability to become that special artisan in that area of development. Meaning, if you were, whether it was a weaver, a goldsmith, a silversmith, whatever it was, a cabinet maker, you had that expertise. But who had it? They said Ramban says, but their background is mortar and brick. How did they have such a sophistication, as if they were the most advanced level of experts in these areas? So the Torah says, in the heart of every wise person, I added chokhmah. If there was wisdom in the heart, I gave chokhmah. So Rav Chaim Volozhiner in Nefesh Chaim asks, so where does it begin? In the heart of every person who has wisdom, I gave chokhmah. But how did you get initially that wisdom in your heart? So he explains, the Gemara tells us, everything in one's life is predestined, except for Yerushalayim. Meaning, we read in Pirkei Avos last week in Perek, Ezeu Osher, Osamech B'chilko. Ezeu Gibor Kovshis Yisro. Why do we say Ezeu Osher? Person has this tremendous financial worth. Gibor, you have that physical ability. Ezeu Chochem Aros Hanolad. What about you have this very superior IQ? That's the Chochem. So the simple understanding is this: whether you're going to be wealthy or you're going to be brilliant or whatever you physically you have the strength, that's an endowment. That's unrelated to you. As the Gemara tells us in Nido, before the conception of a child, the Malach takes that droplet of semen before the child's conceived, and Hashem pronounces on that droplet Chacham or tipesh. Is this child going to be wise or foolish? Wealthy or poor, strong or weak, or whatever it is. Every pronouncement of that person's child's life is pronounced the moment before conception. The only pronouncement which is not made is Rosh Tzaddik v'Rosha. When the person will be a Tzaddik or Rosha, that pronouncement is not made because everything's predestined except Yerushalayim. So Yerushalayim, that's the person's own initiative. Therefore, when the Mishnah speaks about all these various classifications, Chacham, Osher, Gibor, this all has to do with your initiative of Yerushalayim. Kovish Yitzro, Samech Bechelko, all this has to do with the Yerushalayim. So Edus, if you have Yerushalayim, that's Kol Chacham Lev Dosati Chochma. Any heart that had Chochma, person like Yerushalayim, based on that level of Yerushalayim, into that person Hashem gave this ability to be able to participate in the building of the Mishkan, to have that level of expertise. This is how Reb Chaim Voloshin explains the pasuk. Edus is Yiras. If you have Yerushalayim, Hashem gives you that ability to understand. Reishus Chochma Yiras Hashem. The prerequisite to Chukim Mishpatim is Yiras. That's what it is. We had learned, the Rambam says in Hilchos Yisodei Torah, that a prophet, to be classified as a true prophet, he has to do two things. He has to perform a revealed miracle, and he has to forecast the future. Those two things. So if he's able to perform this supernatural act, and he's able to forecast the future, he's established as a Navi Emes. So Rambam asks, maybe he's only performing that supernatural act through sorcery. How do we know this is due to that he's a Navi Hashem? That's why he has the ability. So the Rambam says, just as the Torah says, Al pi shnayim eidim yokum dover. Torah says you accept the testimony of two witnesses who are credible, even to take a person's life. So the question is, maybe they're lying. How do you rely on that testimony as being fact to be able to take a person's life? The answer is because Hashem says, if two witnesses come and you follow the procedure to make that determination, you accept it as truth. Because Hashem said so. Identically here, if a Navi comes and performs a supernatural act, he's established as a Navi Emes, and you don't have to be concerned it's sorcery, and he's a Navi Sheker. He's a false prophet. So what is it? How do you know? What's Edus? Edus is absolute truth. Why? Because Hashem says it is. You meet his criteria, it's truth. That's evidence. You have Yerushalayim, that's Edus. If a person fears Hashem, you merit the ability to see truth. You become endowed with truth. Therefore, that is the prerequisite. Edus, Edus v'achukim mishpatim. If you want to know what chukim mishpatim, what they are, it has to be predicated on Edus, which is Yerushalayim. What's the word Akev? It means if. Because it said im tishmun. Why does Torah use the term Akev? But Akev tishmun as Eis HaMishpatim or Eile. These laws, ushmartem, and you retain them, vasisam osam, and you actualize them. The Shema Hashem Elokech Kos Abris, Hashem will uphold the covenant, and the chesed which he had promised to your forefathers. So there's a famous Rashi over here, cites the Midrash. What does Torah use the term Akev? That if one observe even the mitzvahs which seem to be ordinary, that the average person tramples on with his heel, meaning the neglected mitzvos, if you even address those mitzvos, which are not valued sufficiently, therefore they're neglected, v'shomer Hashem yishmalcho havtachoso. Hashem will keep the promise. But what is the prerequisite to that, to be worthy of that? that you even observe the mitzvahs hakalos, which are normally neglected, which normally people just trample on with their heels. You take a look in the Balaturim here, the beautiful things he points out. The third line, Akev. Numerically, what's Akev? Akev is 172. Aleph Kuv Beis Tevos Yesh Baser Sadibros. Zebeshomram Akev Rov. He says there were 172 words in the Aser Sadibros. So if you keep the Aser Sadibros, that's what's alluding to. And Tishmar Akev Tiskel Lamar Rav Tuvcha Asher Tzafanto L'Reyecho. The great goodness which Hashem hid away for those who fear him. Akev, another allusion, Akev. The letters of Akev is Keva. Ase Torosa Keva. If your Torah is primary, then you merit all this. Akev, Anovo. Now the heel is the lowest part of the body. So it alludes to what? To humility. Lamod mina Akev hazeh sheholech achar regel. Derech Anovo. When you walk, the heel always follows the toe. It's always behind. Lefichoch eno nigov kvo etzbosa reglaim. It's more human. The Gemara says when you walk, if you're not careful, what do? You stub your toe. You don't stub your heel. Because since the toes are the beginning of the front of the foot, so Akev is behind. So what protects the heel from getting injured? The toes, because the toes are out front, and the heel is behind. Also, that's humility. That's the value of humility. You remain humble, you're protected due to that humility. Now, we said Akev is now Avram Avinu. At what age did he recognize God? Right, he was 172. He lived to 175. The Gemara says, Hashem says, why did Avram merit all the bracha? Because Akev Asher Shama Bekoli. Because at Akev, he listened to my voice. Es Mishmarti, my laws, Torosi. He kept the Torah its entirety before it was given. For how many years did he keep the Torah in its entirety before it was given? 172 years. So the Gemara says in Yuma, from here we see that what age did Avram Avinu recognize his maker? At the age of 3 years old. At the age of 3, he already recognized HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Akev Shoma Lakoli, from the age of, for 172 years, he heeded my voice. That's 172. So it's interesting. All the allusions of Akev here, 172 letters, words in the Aser Sadibros. Ase Torah Keva. All that is alluded to in the age of Avram when he came upon Hashem. That means for 172 years, it was every one of these things. He merited Aser Sadibros. Avram Avinu was Anochi Of of Efer. That's Anivos. I mean, all the Torah Keva. What was primary in Avram's life? Serving Hashem, nothing else. That was primary. Everything was only to facilitate that. Now the question is, why, if a person observes even the mitzvahs that are she'odom dosh ba'kevov, why does he merit all this bracha? As we'll see in a moment, what's the bracha? Ha'hevcha, God will love you. Ve'iracha, He will bless you. Ve'irbecha, He will increase your number. Ve'irach pri bitnecha, pri admosecha, He'll bless the fruits of your womb, the fruits of the earth, the gondcha, the grain, tziroshcha, yitzarecha, the wine, the oil, shkar lofecha, asher sonecha, the flax, the aladoma shenishvat lavsech los lisloch. When I finish, Baruch tiyeh mikol amim, and if you do that, if you observe even the mitzvah she'odam dosh ba'kevov, you'll be blessed from all the nations. Lo yivacha okav ha'korah. There won't be any person who's barren. not only among yourselves, even among your animals. Hashem will remove all illness, all the contractable diseases of Egypt, which you know firsthand because you witnessed them. Hashem will not allow them to come upon you, and he'll put them upon your enemies. And this is for what? Go Akev. If you do the Akev, you even observe the mitzvah Shodom Doshba Kevov, then you merit all this unlimited bracha. Now the question is why? And a spiritual yardstick. What do people value certain mitzvahs more than others? What does a person neglect the mitzvah? Why? Every mitzvah, why? What is the basis for every mitzvah? It's Dvar Hashem. Hashem commanded, you must do it. Whether it's tzedakah, whether it's being careful what comes out of your mouth, whether it's shatnez, whatever it is. So the whole concept of a less important mitzvah, more important mitzvah. That discussion only has relevance if the impetus and the motivation to do the mitzvah is what do I have to gain? What's in my best interest? The person who sees things through that lens, he evaluates, is it worth it, is it not worth it? It's okay. Only if you approach it with that approach could we talk about mitzvahs being neglected. But if the basis for you to doing a mitzvah is because it's the word of Hashem, there's no such thing as a more important mitzvah, less important mitzvah. They're all important because the basis for every mitzvah is doing the word of Hashem. So there's no such thing as a spiritual yardstick. If one even observes the mitzvahs which other people neglect, why does he observe that? Because the basis for his observance is not himself, that he's a beneficiary, but rather because he recognizes that it's all as important because it's the Dvar Hashem. So when you recognize that at that level, that you want to do the Hashem's will, then you merit everything. But if you're in it for yourself, and you pick and choose, then Hashem says, if that's the case, then you don't merit it all. Because, as I said, if it's me, then you get it all. If it's you, that's based on your worthiness. Therefore, you don't merit it all. That's the pivotal point between both of these perspectives, whether you get it all or you don't. Otherwise, the whole discussion of mitzvah kala has no relevance. The Mishnah tells in Pirkei Avos, you should pursue a mitzvah kala as a more severe mitzvah. Why? Because you don't understand the innate reward for a mitzvah. What do we have to reward? Who are we talking to? Are we talking to the greatest tzaddik? I'm not talking to the greatest tzaddik. If it's a tzaddik, I have to tell you, you should pursue even an ordinary mitzvah as a more severe because you don't know the innate value. Because maybe what you consider ordinary, it's not so ordinary. What do we talk ordinary? Not ordinary. You should pursue it because it's the word of Hashem. The answer is we're talking about a person, he's in it for himself. He needs that motivation. He needs that level of attraction. So we say, don't think that what you consider mitzvah kala has less value than chamura, because even the mitzvah kala the schar may even be greater. Therefore, you're passing on something which you should not pass on. So we're not talking about a person who's not at the more advanced level. We're not talking about voy ekev tishmuju. We're not talking about that in Pirkei Avos. Otherwise, I don't have to give you this level of incentive. You can ask the question again, Jake, and I'll answer it.
Based on what the Rav's saying, how do we understand Talmud Torah Keneged Kula?
Okay, now, what happens if you have a conflict, two mitzvahs? Which one takes priority over the other? That's not mitzvah kal. Then we talk about mitzvah kal, mitzvah chamura, because there is a formula. Talmud Torah Keneged Kula. Torah is the ultimate. The times, even though it's the ultimate, if a person, we mentioned the Rambam rules based on the Gemara, if you have a mitzvah which cannot be delegated through a third party, you interrupt your Torah study. What about Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam? If Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, why do anything? Just study Torah. Don't do mitzvahs. Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam means, as the Gemara tells us in Kedushin, Godla Talmud Shetalmi V'li Maseh. The learning of Torah encompasses everything, and that is the activator that you're able to actualize the mitzvah. That's the prerequisite to every mitzvah. The motivating force that allows you to actualize the mitzvah is the study of Torah. You merit the siyata d'shmaya, to be able to overcome the physical, despite the inertia that we have, to be able to come and do the mitzvah. That comes through the study of Torah. That's Torah, Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, for that reason. That's all encompassing. It's not, so we're not putting a price tag on it. That's why you should do it. You say to a person, you're foolish. That's like having rutz mitzvah kalkim chamura. If a person goes and he could study and he does something else, you say you realize what you're passing on. So that would be no different than any other mitzvah. Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. Well, Chazal tells Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam in terms of its innate effect, because if it's innate, it affects you to that degree. We had in the famous Medrash in Eicha, Halavai Osia Zovu v'Torasi Shamaru. The Jews, they abandoned the Torah. It says in Eicha, they abandoned Torah. So Hashem says, Halavai Osia Ozovu v'Torasi Shamaru ki Moshe b'Machzul Mutav. There's a certain innate enlightenment in Torah that would have brought them back to truth, would have brought us back to Hashem. We were idolaters, but if we would have stuck to the Torah, just being imbued and being exposed to that, automatically we would have reverted back. We would have seen there's a certain innate illumination, a light. That light would bring you back, because that's the innateness of Torah. It has that ability to bring to actualize you, to change you. That's the Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam.
Rabbi, so
A person is supposed to do a mitzvah lishma. A person is supposed to do a mitzvah with reverence, with love. But you realize, even if you do it, you're at that level. That person vacillates. What was the intensity of that reverence? What was the level of the reverence? What was the level of love? So within the context of love, you're always going up and regressing. You advance, you regress. There's always choice. At every level, you're always making choices. But if it's the ultimate, why do you vacillate? You should always be going forward, continuously forward. So even they were at that special level, within that level, there's always this give and take. It's never on a continuum that you're always going from Michoy Lechoy. You're not. We find that Avram Avinu, what was the difference in Avram and Noach? So Rashi over there, based on the pasuk, says, it says, Es Elokim Salach Noach. He was a tzaddik, but Es Elokim Salach. Noach Yitzorch Sad. Noach had to be assisted. To be able to advance, Hashem had to hold his hand and continuously pull him up. Avram Avinu lo Yitzorch Sad. Avram Avinu did not need that motivation, or somebody to hold his hand and pull him. He was self-motivated. Avram went b'choy l'choy. He advanced from moment to moment. We asked the question that Yosef was the most special son of Yaakov because he was Ben Zekunim. He was the favorite son of Yaakov. So Ben Zekunim, there were three interpretations. Ben Zekunim, he was born to him in his old age. That's Ben Zekunim, because he was his 11th child. Binyamin was the 12th child. Well, Ben Zekunim means Bar Chakim Ulo. He was the wisest of his children. And the third interpretation of Ben Zekunim was Zivikun Don L'Shaloviv. Facially, he looked identical as his father. Yosef, his features were identical to Yaakov's. Those were the three reasons. So we asked the question then, we that were at this, whatever, a much lesser level, we have our favorites. It's the child born to us in one's old age, you favor that child. We're talking about Yaakov Avinu is the Bechir Sheba'opos. He's the most special of all the patriarchs. Me to say because he was born to Yaakov in his old age, that's a reason to favor him. You have Yehuda, you have Levi, you have all these other people, great. So because Yosef was born to when he was older, therefore he favored him. Well, why is that a basis to favor? There's something sentimental about Yaakov's relationships. Yaakov's relationship wasn't based on being sentimental.
Yeah, I mean, look, he looked like him. You could say the exact.
Okay, looking is different. Yaakov's life, every moment of Yaakov's life was another level of spiritual advancement. So based on who Yaakov was at that moment, that will determine what the quality of that child is going to be, spiritually speaking. So because Yosef was Yaakov's 11th child, at what level was Yaakov at that point? He was at his most advanced level versus any prior level. Because every day it's another level of advancement. So because Yosef, besides being conceived from Rachel, doesn't say because he was Rachel's child. Because he was Ben Zekunim. Because he was born to him later in life at his old age. That means Yaakov was at his most advanced level of spirituality. As a result of that, the child that was conceived from him at that point, that child is a more special child. That's what I'm saying. But these are the Avos HaKadoshim. Every moment was another level of advancement. But even people live in the desert time, they would Sinai, they continue vacillated within that context of greatness. More or less, more reverence, more love, less every day. We vacillate differently. With us, it's do we do, don't we do? Do we do the right thing? Do we do the wrong thing? But we also vacillate even when we do the right thing. Do we do it while we're distracted, or we do it when we're focused?